Mesa Gifford is a British veteran of the Ukrainian army who will be well known to members of NATO and those who follow the Ukrainian war in detail. As he says on his Twitter profile, he is channeling the spirit of George Orwell, and his dispatches from the front lines of this conflict have been highly engaging, informative, eloquent, and full of humanity. Mesa has an MSc in Security and Diplomacy Studies, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome him to the channel.
Good morning.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about, and I have been an avid follower of everything you post on Twitter. I think it gives an incredibly sort of personal sense of what was going on the front. You are, of course, back in the UK at the moment, and I guess we'll start from there. I mean, it's an incredibly different environment, and there must be a huge amount of dissonance, as it were.
Yeah, well, it's so strange to be doing something for 2 years, 2 long years from even before the conflict, technically a couple of weeks before the conflict, to invest a lot of my passion and energy into something, and then with some personal trauma, with the death of my father, to be back home in the UK and suddenly working in the garden, sort of helping my mother out, sort of spending time with my brothers and trying to do a bit of traveling, that sort of stuff. It's just a change of pace. It's also gives you a little bit of inner turmoil at the same time, because I've still got good friends on the front line who are still fighting every day. You can't sort of, however much you try, you can't block out the noise from what's going on in Ukraine. If you love Ukraine, if you love the people, if you genuinely support the people there against this evil invasion, then it's, yeah, as I said, it's quite difficult to separate yourself from that entirely.
Absolutely, and in no way is it comparable, but I did go to Ukraine for the first time last August to run an event where the inimitable Mr. Sweeney and others were kind enough to speak at the event. And there's a certain intensity of life. You get the impression that many Ukrainians are living 3 or 4 lives in parallel. And even though Lviv is largely out of the danger zone, although it was hit by missiles just before I arrived and just after I left, the paranoid part of my brain says that they kind of knew I was there and reminded me of that. There's an intensity to that, and the fact that the air raid sirens go off 3, 4 times a day and through the night, you're never able to forget there's a war going on, are you, in any spot in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, I was there. I was delighted to have been there just before the war. And so I actually saw both sides, the war Ukraine and the real Ukraine. And the real Ukraine, the one that I saw just literally a couple of weeks before the war started, was one of joy. It was just after Christmas. The Christmas decorations in many places were still up. The restaurants were full. You saw women and children and husbands walking arm in arm in the streets. And I have to say, I can remember at the time thinking to myself, wow, there's such a disconnect here between what the West is saying. So I left a West, or a Britain, I should really say, that was, every newspaper was saying, war is imminent, 100,000 Russian troops on the border. Will they bomb Kyiv tomorrow, etc., etc. I went from that to suddenly a country nervous. A black cloud had descended on this country, but one that there was optimism there. There was sort of like people were trying to get on, keep calm and carry on, that sort of spirit. And I think that's really an enduring thing of this war so far, is the parallels between what we saw in the First World War and the Second World War, of people undergoing huge amounts of trauma, the refugee trains, the terrible front lines, the trenches, yet at the same time, people mucking in, people trying to support each other. You can go to any place in Lviv and Kyiv and other places, and people are making camo nets, they're sort of cooking food, frontline kitchen, etc. So that's just, so you see the worst of humanity and the best of humanity. But at the same time, one little anecdote, when you mentioned a second ago about hearing for the first time those sirens, that again gives you a flashback to the Second World War. But I can also remember, amongst all the parallels as genuine trauma, I can remember being on the bus once in Ukraine, going from Ukraine to Poland. I was going back to see my family just for a weekend and then come back. I'd been given special permission to leave. And I was on this bus and I was the only man on the bus. And it was mostly women and children. And this young girl was sitting next to me and she was making this horrible high-pitched whine. And and at first I thought it could be a little girl who was just playing around, or it could be a little girl with some problems of her own, some mental health problems. But then I realized what she was doing was mimicking the sound of the air raid siren, and there was something incredibly, what's the word, sinister, and what's the word, sort of traumatic, upsetting about seeing this little girl hunched in the corner of this bus, making the high-pitched whine of the air raid siren, because that's all her little life had ever heard. And again, it reminds trauma here, the underlying trauma amongst all this war, and why we all support Ukraine.
Let's turn to your personal motivations. I'm sure every interview you do, you're asked this one, so it's a bit of a lowball question here. But what got you connected to Ukraine, especially having been there before the full-scale war began? Of course, you know, the Russian invasion has been going on for an exceedingly long time, more than 10 years now. What was the connection to Ukraine? And then what is the motivation to fight? Because that's very much a bigger decision to take.
Well, the best way to describe this is it's not my first rodeo, as many people know. So you hinted at my background. I did both my degree and my master's in the field of international relations, with an emphasis on sort of security, peace building, that sort of stuff. I was heavily involved in the Syrian conflict, where I fought against the Islamic State. And for me, I've always seen, I'm not a, what's the word, war tourist. I'm not a professional soldier. Instead, I genuinely consider myself a humanitarian. Every single cause I've ever got involved with, and these conflict causes of Syria and Ukraine are just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I was heavily involved in Zimbabwe in 2008, working alongside the movement for democratic change. I've worked in the Congo, I've worked in Somalia. So I've always tried to push myself and find genuine causes that are often unreported or unsupported, and actually put my attention and love into those projects. A big passion of mine in the Congo, for example, was to work with a charity called Papa RDC, which worked with pygmy tribes in the forest, who are horribly persecuted by other tribes and by the local government. And I spent a number of months both in Uganda and in Congo pursuing that project. And often this was at my own expense. It was something that I dedicated an entire summer to, between working in the city and doing other jobs. And with the rise of the Islamic State, the utter brutality of ISIS, women and children being burnt alive in cages, children as young as 3 years old being sold into sexual slavery. This, for me, was one of the worst sort of conflicts in the Middle East, and the most, what's the word, the clearest distinction between good and evil since the Second World War, since the fight against Nazism. This was a genocidal campaign to destroy the Yazidi people and to rip the Middle East to shreds. And for me, someone who is passionate, who considers himself a humanist and a humanitarian, for me, picking up a rifle and standing in solidarity with local people was the easiest thing I could do. And a lot of that passion, a lot of that determination also gives you an understanding of what drove me in Ukraine as well, because this is also an open and shut case of a larger state power invading and colonizing an independent nation, which is totally different, which has its own aspirations and deserves to have peace and equality and democracy long into the future. But more than that, in those early days when the war started in Ukraine, I also had friends on the ground as well, which helped educate me. I was following very closely people like Cossack Gundi. This is a guy that I served alongside in Syria all those years before. So I knew there were guys that I knew on the front line who were fighting, but I didn't want to throw myself in. So I actually went out to Ukraine just before the war, just to educate myself, meet with local members of parliament, meet with humanitarians, aid workers, that sort of stuff. And I had a few projects that I wanted to start putting together, particularly in the realm of medical aid, that sort of stuff. The invasion hit me for six. It came a little bit out of the blue, despite what the West was saying. I sort of got myself a bit complacent, and I did have to leave Ukraine very quickly. But I was back within the month with a friend of mine. We'd crowdfunded or fundraised about $100,000 to buy a huge amount of medical aid. And within the month, I was back on the ground with a vehicle teaching people TCCC, these medical classes. So, and I did that for a few months before finally joining the army. So my experience within Ukraine was one of, don't throw myself in head first too much. Go in, support where you can, fundraise, educate people, and then when the moment's right, join the army and stand in solidarity. Sort of do it in a much more calm way than I did when I went to Syria, which was a little bit more throw myself in the deep end.
That sounds like a good idea because, I've been following the full-scale conflict from day one, and in fact, following quite closely what was going on prior to that. And it does seem that a lot of volunteers, that the Ukrainian army wasn't geared up to really assimilate a bunch of volunteers. It wasn't necessarily even geared up for its own units to be that effective in the first couple of weeks and months. So did that really help you understand where you wanted to serve and in what capacity, and where you could really bring your experience to leverage?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I knew they were going to have a lot of troubles integrating foreigners within their units anyway. Foreigners by nature, international volunteers, particularly those that can easily access the conflict, are a real broad church, and that's quite a sympathetic way to describe them. There's going to be a lot of them there who have skills that are desperately needed by the military over in Ukraine. Medical skills, they might have familiarization with Western tactics and equipment that's being provided by the West, that they can help train people, they can help deploy those weapons quickly to the front line. Others will be people who have been out of the military for a while, others who may not have served at all, who may be a little bit more of a drain on resources. They might be the most enthusiastic people in the world. God bless them for that. Others might actually not be so enthusiastic, and they may just be there for the wrong reasons. So I always knew that the 20,000 international volunteers that came in those early weeks of the conflict were always going to be a challenge to integrate. But as you say, on top of that, they also had hundreds of thousands of young men and women, of course, joining the military. One of the most sobering and touching moments of my time in Kyiv, just at the outbreak of the war, was going with a couple of friends to the recruitment center, where there were trucks. It was in southern part of Kyiv. It was some sort of, I don't know if it was a former football stadium or it was some sort of stadium type place. And there was these military trucks parked up, boxes of AK-47s being ripped off these trucks, crowbars ripping these boxes to splinters, with young men in an assortment of uniforms, jeans. Even I saw one guy wearing his, he just arrived on his bike. He had his full helmet on in the queue, picking up rifles, being lined up with Ukrainian soldiers with clipboards, sort of saying, right, telling them where they're going to go and what they'll be doing and all the rest of it. And these are scenes not seen in Britain since the First World War, the Second World War, when you saw young men crewing outside the recruitment center. And there was something so incredibly touching. I was not even allowed in. These soldiers came up. They said, "Who are you?" I showed my passport. They said, "No, you're not even allowed to be here. Turn around, go back." And there was this moment where my friend, this Ukrainian guy, was on the other side of these barriers. And I just said to him, I was like, "Yuri, I'm so sorry for what's happening to your country." I was so upset hearing the sound of the bombs in the distance, seeing all these men picking up these rifles. And he was just like, "Yeah." I said, "I'm sorry too." He said, "And I'm sorry that we've got to part ways now, but I've got to queue up here and hopefully I'll see you soon." And I said to him, "Look, I'll be back. I'm gonna go home and I will be back." And I can remember just walking away, just being so upset by the whole experience. And this is from a guy who spent years fighting in Syria. It takes a lot for me to be moved emotionally. I think I'm quite a determined and focused person who doesn't get distracted by emotion or the rest of it. But seeing those people and seeing the suffering early doors again inspired me to join the army and do what I can.
So you clearly have a connection there. Do you have any sense of, is there any element of guilt in there? Because Britain, and I'm talking for myself here as well, Britain was a signatory to the Budapest memorandums. We offered And of course, it turns out that piece of paper wasn't worth the ink used to sign it. But we helped to persuade Ukraine to give up its deterrence. And that clearly has been instrumental in it being invaded, or Russia being able to invade it. Not only that, we have, I would say, ignored red line after red line, wound our armed forces down, failed to push back against Russia in Syria and multiple other instances. To an extent, this is an incredible failure of deterrence, of which Britain has been a key part, along with the US, Germany, and many others.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think there's a lot of a naivety. I think there's a weakness within democracy. Democracy has a lot to say for itself. It is, I think, it's the most robust government. I think it's the right sort of government that we should all aspire to have, and all the rest of it. And I'm a firm believer in democracy, but there is a fundamental weakness within democracy. There's a number of weaknesses within democracy, but there's one, which is that that often democracies have a very short-term view of the world and international relations. They don't take a longer-term view. That's obvious because people have to be elected. So for years now, in fact decades, British politicians, as you say, have been running down the defense budgets, and also they don't realize there's naivety there on the danger of Russia. That Russia is an empire. It's the largest imperial empire that still exists to this day. I don't know how they've got away with it, but they're an empire in the same vein as the former British Empire. And if the British Empire existed today, I would expect that the rest of the world would turn around and say this is unacceptable. There's how you view the world, how you view yourself, and how you control the different populations that make up your territories. We take issue with that, but Russia somehow has got away with it. And not only does it have an empire today, from Chechnya to the Siberia and all the rest of it, it also aspires to keep growing that empire. It sees certain countries around it as their traditional stomping grounds, as their traditional areas of control, and these nationalistic populist politicians like Putin just desire to rebuild the former Soviet Empire. He described it himself as the loss of the Soviet Empire as one of the greatest tragedies that's ever happened on this planet. I do think the British government and the Western governments of France, Germany, and America, etc., they haven't invested enough. They haven't taken the threat seriously enough, and this has been a wake-up call for them. And countries like Georgia, Afghanistan, Ukraine more recently, they have paid the price for much of the naivety in the West. But for me personally, there is some level of guilt there. I mean, but not too much. That's the actions of my politicians. I think the guilt should be held by those that have made those fundamental mistakes. No, what inspired me, what upsets me, is the injustice. And being on those streets in Kyiv at that time and seeing what Russia was doing to Ukraine, it was truly upsetting and terrifying to see. So that's where I get my passion from.
And this is before Bucha, Irpin came to light. And of course, there will have, in future, there'll be other names of other villages and towns that we're barely aware of now. And similar atrocities will come to light. You've talked about this being a morally unambiguous conflict, black and white. And I don't think anyone watching this channel, apart from the trolls, would disagree with that. Do you ever make a connection between at the time, the sort of media-focused atrocity that ISIS was perpetuating? Do you see some commonality with the lack of, I would say, any moral boundaries or limits on the Russian side as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so ISIS so I'll start that again because my phone just gone off there. Absolutely. I mean, ISIS were incredibly proud of what they were doing. They wanted to strike fear. The ISIS brand of terrorism had been developed over a long period of time, sort of starting with the Zarqawi and the so-called Islamic State of Iraq, sort of butchering people like is it Kenneth Bigley and all the rest of it within Iraq, striking terror. And I think they saw how outraged the West was, how shocked they were by their level of violence. And a lot of those people who were part of Zarqawi's gangs, thugs, part of the who were allied to him and all the rest of it, many of those joined ISIS as well. And they created their own brand of extremism, which was designed to, it was like a new form of propaganda terrorism, whereby they could almost reach into your computer screen, they could reach into your newspaper, and they can attack your soul. You would see those women burning in those cages, those men being lined up in ditches, and you were so horrified by what you were seeing, you felt personally under attack by ISIS. And that was part of their propaganda. They wanted to be seen as a terrifying force. The Russians themselves have been investing in propaganda and the spread of terror for a very long time as well. Russia has always tried to portray itself as much stronger than it actually is in reality. That's the first thing. So their propaganda is designed to do that. Their propaganda is also designed to infiltrate democracy, to exploit its weaknesses. There are weaknesses in democracy. As I said, it's our best form of government, and it's a system of government I would die defending. But at the same time, there are weaknesses within democracy, particularly in modern times when we are so divided and polarized because of social issues and even economic issues as well. But Putin, his entire military and his sort of propaganda system is designed to infiltrate that and to exploit it, to push us further apart. Which again takes a lot of inspiration from the Islamic State, who their propaganda was designed to push apart communities. They wanted extremism to flourish, because a good example of that is that they would often target schools. And you'd say to yourself, why the hell is the Islamic State targeting a school? What's the sort of basis to that? What are they trying to achieve? Well, what they're trying to achieve is to turn the moderate Shias against the moderate Sunnis. And the best way to do that is to do something absolutely horrifying that will push the Shias to the extreme, to attack the Sunnis, who will push them to the extreme to join them. And so there was a brutal, disgusting logic to how cruel they could be. And the same could be said for Russia as well. I think Russia also was surprised by how indisciplined their troops were. I think they were surprised by the ferocity in which the Ukrainians resisted them, and also the backbone of the West to stand in solidarity with Ukraine. The Western response has not been that good. Don't get me wrong; they could have done so much more, much sooner. But yet at the same time, they haven't done nothing, and they have done a lot for Ukraine over the last couple of years. And I think that actually took Russia by surprise, because, as we hinted before, the West has been suffering from war fatigue for so long. We've run down our defense budgets. We've got entangled in foreign engagements that haven't produced much results, and have certainly weakened us geopolitically, our reputation. And that's caused a lot of war fatigue in our countries, and there is no desire to get involved in huge foreign conflicts. And this one is the defining one. And that's what's so upsetting by all this, that we've taken our eye off the ball here, where we've got involved in these conflicts that have eroded public morale, that have run down our budgets. We've spent too much money on the wrong things. And then when the real cause, when something comes along that genuinely threatens Europe and actually threatens our economic future and everything else, we're unprepared for it. And yeah, the politicians have a lot to answer for in that respect.
And this is a classic strategy for autocracies, isn't it? And there is some debate about Russia's role in the variety of wars that have sucked America in, or America and its allies have chosen to get involved with: the Second Iraq War, Afghanistan, etc. And to an extent, perhaps winning initial engagements and then losing the long-term battle and losing the peace is a bit of a defining feature. Ukraine has a chance to change that, and that, as you say, the early response has been strong. It's following a similar kind of pattern. The early response is relatively strong, and then it weakens. We have the slow walking of weaponry, and we have, to an extent, the lack of a strategy. This has even led, and I'm not a as anyone watching this channel knows, I'm not a huge fan of the current government. But Grant Shapps has come out with an extraordinary statement over the weekend where he's basically said that the Western strategy, and by this he almost certainly means Berlin and Washington, is utterly nonsensical in relation to fighting this war. That's not language I recall hearing before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The biggest threat here that's been missed is what Russia's been saying for many years. They believe in a multipolar world. They don't believe in the idea of an American state, the sole superpower of the world. They don't believe in the current sort of world order of peace and stability that we've had for so long, certainly since since the Second World War, or certainly since the end of the Cold War, I should really say. They don't believe in that. They want to destroy it. So they've been very honest about that. So they want to team up with countries like Iran, like China, and others to instead almost balkanize the world, whereby you have regional powers that control it, and there's no one power that can get involved in conflicts all around the world and can be some sort of impartial judge dispensing justice and all the rest of it, which America often sees itself as. But the trouble is, by balkanizing the world, it actually takes us back to the conditions of almost the First World War, when where you've got all these powers in Europe, and the theory was, oh, well, if all of us are incredibly powerful, we'll never go to war. Well, actually, it almost encouraged war. It set the foundations for war. And that's exactly what this new world order that Putin is trying to achieve is going to create. It's going to create a much more unstable world where countries like Russia, like China, genuinely believe that they can, that they have a right to countries around them, and that they can gobble up the smaller powers. So if you believe in the rule of law, in a sort of the order that has been going on for so long, particularly if you're a smaller country, this is the time to stand for that world order, to stand for that rules-based world order, because it's as I said, it's horrifying to know that the future of the world, if you throw in things like climate change, you take into account growing instability within countries, maybe overpopulation, the rise of poverty in certain nations, within the West, the polarization that we've seen as well. The future of the world is not looking so rosy. But but what I've always said, ever since I got back from Syria, was actually that you really do have to draw a line in the sand, and you have to fight for your beliefs, because that's what separates us from the dictatorships, is our values, and is the belief in democracy and the rule of law and all the rest of it. And we should no longer live in a world where we forgive nations for not having those values. I genuinely feel like a new Cold War has started, where on one side you've got the democracies, the other side the autocracies, and we genuinely have to pick a side now and actually start fighting for our beliefs. Because if we don't, we're sleepwalking into disaster.
And if you look at the height of the Cold War, 60s, 70s, it seemed that we did have a tremendous belief in our values, despite, setbacks, despite sort of huge mistakes like Vietnam and so on. There's still an overriding lack of cynicism about democracy and its importance, its centrality. That is something we seem to have to relearn. Now, your experience in Ukraine, I don't detect amongst Ukrainians that same kind of cynicism. In fact, they seem to have let's say, a sort of a spring-like, they're in the first flush of democracy. They actually feel these values, and they feel what it's like to have the absence of those values. They remember what it's like not to have agency in their lives. What was your impression of living and fighting with Ukrainians, and the fact they are clearly not just fighting for land, but they're fighting for values as well?
Well, I think you get the feeling that for the first time, Russians have thrown off the cloak of Russian imperialism. That for so long, even after their democracy, even after their country was independent in the early 90s, you've had the shadow of Russia looming over them. And if Russian propaganda and influence is being felt in America and in Britain, just imagine how negative and how bad that impact has been on its doorstep within Ukraine. They've promoted instability within Ukraine. They've promoted corruption within Ukraine. And by unshackling themselves in recent years, again, it's almost drawn a line in the sand. There's been some people, particularly in the east, there's a large Russian minority within Ukraine, many of whom now are trying to learn Ukrainian. They've fled not towards Russia, but instead towards the west. They crossed the river and they went to places like Lviv. They learned Ukrainian, they joined the army, and they've supported the Ukrainian cause, because even they have been sort of radicalized by this invasion, which they see as this, again, the same injustice that I saw as an outsider, they feel more keenly as citizens of this country. So there is that feeling of unshackling. I think there's also a feeling of pride, that Ukrainians have stood up and actually fought for their country, and they've won these amazing victories over the last couple of years, some of which I was actually part of myself. It's just been amazing to see all these young people coming out finally with the belief that their country has a better future. And that's one thing that I genuinely hope, that amongst all this trauma and amongst all this killing and death, that actually we have the nucleus, the spark of a much brighter future for Ukraine. We just have to invest in it. We just need to pile those logs on that spark until it becomes a roaring flame. And just to talk more broadly about, I suppose, the Ukrainian frontline and what it's like to serve alongside these people. I was always blessed to have served in, well, I've only ever served in one battalion. That's the 131st, which is the separate reconnaissance battalion, primarily in the south. And this was an incredibly professional battalion, one of the most professional forces and units I've ever worked with in the sort of 10 years or so of time that I've been in foreign conflicts and involving myself with different causes around the world. Yeah, it was just an amazing experience to be clearing tree lines with these people, going on missions, rescuing, coming into villages where the villagers hadn't seen Ukrainian soldiers for well over a year. And suddenly there people are throwing flowers at you, and the feeling of being part of a force, a liberating force, is one that's just truly special. And it's one that even to this day, as I'm back in the UK, as I'm sort of trying to focus on my home life for a little bit, there are moments when I'm lying in bed or walking in the garden where I just stop and it makes me smile, because of all the trauma that I've experienced over the last couple of years, there has been so much good, and the good comes from the Ukrainian spirit. And also, may I say, the spirit online, which I'm sure you've seen as well. And that is hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people technically, but we on Twitter alone, I see hundreds of thousands of people donating money, volunteering, going out to Ukraine, educating people, fighting back against the propaganda. And these are ordinary people. They're like teachers. They have normal jobs, yet they spend their weekends online pushing back against this Russian propaganda. And you know it bugs them. It tortures the Russians, because they are making statements sort of saying, calling them trolls, calling them CIA assets and all the rest of it. So they are making an impact, which is just brilliant, because it shows that there is a genuine humanity. And as you say online, I'm channeling the spirit of Orwell. The truth is, we're all channeling the spirit of Orwell. We're all being internationals, and we're all supporting Ukraine. And that's a wonderful thing to see.
And I think it's an important realization. I mean, first of all, we'll turn to civic society and the role that it plays in Ukraine's victory, because clearly government funding, government capability, government efficiency is not nearly enough for Ukraine victory in Ukraine. So the role of civic society is absolutely vital, but also it channels those kind of values. But as you say, there is a dedicated community supporting. I mean, I've been concerned that it's something of a bubble. It feels much bigger from the inside than it actually is. But you're right, there are many hundreds of thousands of individuals. And the recent fundraiser by Jake Bro shows exactly how vigorous that is. You know, he's raised $1 million in a week, and it's still climbing. So first question is, how important is that connection with the pro-Ukraine sort of bubble around the world? And how aware are Ukrainians on the front of that sort of support?
They're very aware. I mean, there are a lot of men and women under arms in Ukraine. So many of them have received support from the international community, from normal volunteers. Those are often international volunteers, but actually they're on the ground. They're far more local volunteers, Ukrainian people going out and dishing out stuff. And they are very aware of that support. They also realize they're pragmatic in the sense that they know that the real battle winning stuff is going to come from the nations. It's going to be the Patriot missiles. It's going to be the long-range HIMARS, all the rest of it. That's what's going to win this war. But the morale boost of the fellas, of the international community that supports Ukraine, the genuine support, the material support, should not be underestimated, because, as you say, millions of extra dollars, and often these supplies are targeted. So, for example, when I was working with the 131st, I've raised tens of thousands of dollars for them. I've raised tens of thousands of dollars for the units around me, the 9th, the 73rd, all these special forces groups that were working in the south, going on boat missions and all the rest of it. I was buying them special scopes, sort of thermal scopes. I was buying everything from vehicles to quad bikes to armor. We've even bought bullets in the past, extra bullets for certain rifles that it was hard to get certain rifle calibers, particularly in the early months of the war. And so that means that although my battalion will receive a budget from the central government, and Lord knows what that is. Let's say it's $1 million for the whole battalion. There's 1,000 men. They have to spend that on wages. They have to compensate people. They need to buy. They need to pay for the fuel and whatever they have to do. But at the same time, it just means that I, on the ground, am able to talk to people and say, what do we need to make ourselves more effective? And instead of going through the rigmarole of going through central government and trying to get extra supplies that maybe that other units are also fighting for, and you're squabbling over scant supplies, instead I'm able to talk directly to my commanders and actually provide aid directly to them, actually get the stuff from abroad, etc. So again, it's targeted aid. But as I said, let's not underestimate the fact or delude ourselves into thinking that this is going to win the war. What's really going to win the war is our governments. And that's why I often say, when I'm online and when I'm talking to people, I say over and over again, lobby your Congress people, lobby your member of parliament, write letters, be there in support of Ukraine visibly, because that's what's going to change public opinion, and that's what's going to change government policy, and that's what's going to eventually win the war.
And one of the cases made over the weekend, there was a major event in Estonia where historians and policymakers gathered. Timothy Schneider's been making the argument latterly that we risk a Second World War scenario. Now, Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia was given up to the Nazis without a fight. Its extraordinarily advanced engineering, factories, material, and workforce essentially allowed the German war effort to accelerate to the invasion of Poland. So I think that's a compelling argument there. A similar argument is being made that if we were to lose Ukraine, as improbable as that feels at the moment, Russia would gain, again, not just territory, but vast resources, expertise, and a portion of the army, which at the moment it's almost inconceivable that people who are fighting the Russians now may be coerced to fight on their side. But he's flagged this as a risk. And Russia's very good at manipulating all sorts of emotions. And you could see a brainwashing campaign, working on resentment. If Ukraine was to fall, there'd be a lot of resentful people, and that is fertile ground for Russian propaganda. Now, I'm not saying that scenario is likely, but should we wake up to this as a possibility, and how do we prevent it happening? And is it possible that the Ukrainians you fight with and who know you well, may or already are becoming resentful of the lack of Western strategy?
Well, you're highlighting the stakes here, basically, and the stakes are incredibly vast, not just regionally, but internationally. The only reason I'm saying this is not a bizarre flex, but instead to sort of, I really want people to know this. Like I've done a degree and a master's in the field of international relations. I've in the past spent many years studying countries. I nearly did a PhD in international relations. I would have pursued a career in academia had my life not taken me down a slightly different route. But so when I say this, I genuinely mean it. Ukraine should be one of the wealthiest countries in Europe. Ukraine has only been independent since the 90s, and for much of the time since its independence, it's been under the boot heel of Russia, promoting corruption, sowing division within society, attacking the economy, cyber attacking, all the rest of it. The odious presence of Vladimir Putin has been hung over Ukraine like a stink, like a fog, for many, many years. And for the first time, that fog is lifting. So that the stake here is that Ukraine can accept, and Ukraine is naturally a European country. It is not part of Russia's sphere. It is a European nation that's been colonized, just like Ireland was colonized by Britain. And the same arguments that some bizarre English nationalist may make towards controlling Ireland. But it's been part of Britain for 800 years. They speak English on the ground, for goodness sake. This is part of Britain. That you would laugh in the face of such a madman. Why the hell do we take seriously people who make the same claims for Russia and Ukraine? I don't know. But anyway, so Ukraine could be a leading member of the European Union. It could be a major power within the EU area. What will happen if Russia takes the whole country is they will dominate the world's food supply. And they will have a huge amount of resources for their army. They'll be adding an economy of 300 billion, 400 billion, whatever it is, to their own. And what it will do more than that, much more than that, was it will just encourage them on. Because there are large parts of Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, and all the rest of it, parts of Moldova, there's parts of Georgia, there's parts of just all around the world, there's parts of the world that Russia would just love to get their hands on. And the stakes of seizing those lands would actually be lower for the Western world than Ukraine. If we're not willing to stand for Ukraine, why would we stand for many of the other smaller countries around the world that will also be in the firing range of Russia? And what Russia is essentially doing is, well, we will come under sanctions. We maybe came under attack and all the rest of it, but because we've got nuclear weapons, as soon as we get our boots on the ground, as soon as we take the country, it's hard to get rid of us. It's like some sort of not pest. What's the word? Something that just clings onto the country and won't let go, like a tumor. Russia will be like
parasite
a tumor.
is
like a parasite.
what I always think of it as.
Yes. Russia will have a parasitic foreign policy whereby they will just move troops into, let's say, Lithuania, Latvia, and they'll get their boots on the ground, and their negotiation will be, how much of the land we've taken will we give back? And that's why I think the Baltic countries of Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, I think that's why their policy has changed. They're not. I don't believe for one second those countries will trade land for time for the NATO to respond. I think these countries have now woken up to the reality that they have to fight for every single centimeter of their country because Russia will not be stopped. And it's not just Russia that threatens us. It's also countries like China. If China looks at Russia and sees that a nuclear power is able to take this country, then why the hell shouldn't they take Taiwan? Why shouldn't they take many other places around the world? And it's just horrifying, the implications of this, because it promotes uncertainty. And it destroys the rules-based international order, and it just, as I said, balkanizes the world into a scarier place than it should be.
And we started talking about with dissonance, and it's becoming, people may see this as a sort of paranoid, but it's something that's going to be turning up in a lot more of the videos on this channel. The idea that we are in the early stages of World War III. In fact, if we don't change course, it may even be inevitable, but there is potentially still time to delay it or even prevent it through our actions. But we're talking the next weeks, the next months are critical in making decisions that will decide whether this is a process we slide into or not.
Well, you're right. I think what we need to do is stand up for our values now. Because I think that time is not on the side of these dictatorships. I think countries like China have been rising for a while, but eventually they're either going to plateau or they're actually going to decline at some point.
China is, if you look at the economic figures, it already is.
It already is plateauing.
Yeah.
So if they're going to do something, they're going to do something now. So time is not on their hands. Excuse me. So what I would expect the West to do is to remind itself of what the stakes are here, remind itself of its values, that remember that amongst all the stakes in the international politics that are human lives, to remember that, and actually to stand for it now, to fight for it now. Because if we fight for it now, not only does it deter physically, but as I say, as soon as you re-establish the world's the rules-based international order, once we establish those rules and say we are going to fight to keep those the way the world is, then China may try and build up its resources to perhaps challenge the West at a later date. But I genuinely think that they don't have the time and resources to do that. I think that we can win this so-called Cold War, and for the betterment of the people of China and the people of Russia, if we stay the course. I think the stakes here are absolutely vast. And it's just also upsetting to see a country that I love, a Ukraine that I fought for on the front line and bled for. I've seen my friends die for. I don't like to see them used as a political pawn and as a football by the West. And it's really hard to see, let's say, the political party of Ronald Reagan, the Republican Party, being so weak and divided on this issue. For me, it's insane. It's the definition of madness.
The other challenge, and this is one that's coming through the military conversations that I'm having more and more, is that we have at times overestimated Russia, overestimated its capability, and then we swing wildly to underestimating it. What they've shown is that they can be far more resilient and actually even more resourceful than we give them credit for. We see glide bombs, we see their tenaciousness, we laughed at the meat wave attacks, and yet they still keep mobilizing people. They still have the capacity to do that, and they'll keep doing it until they're either beaten back or they succeed. We don't seem to sort of learn that lesson, but at the same time, we've given them space to develop and learn and innovate. And now there's a conversation about an extraordinary arms race that's taking place between drones and electronic warfare. It's an arms race that seems completely counter to the entire structure and direction of Western militaries, which was to develop expensive systems to tackle expensive systems. Here you've got almost like an entrepreneurial arms race to develop kit that works and then bring the unit cost down, and then you've got a sort of EW race going on. Where's this going to go? And this seems to be a monster that we've allowed to grow, which may come back and seriously bite us.
Well, I think the recent war has highlighted that mass matters, that for so long we've been dealing with insurgencies and little frontier problems around the world, and that we've sort of neglected the core reason for an armed force, and that is to deter a peer aggressor, someone who actually genuinely may destroy our society. And one thing that the recent war also has done is remind us, as turbocharged, because looking into the future is kind of like looking with squinted eyes through a opaque piece of glass at something that's a mile behind it. It's very difficult to understand what war will look like once you're suddenly confronted by it. There's this old saying in the British military, I'm sure it's the same around the world, which is you're always fighting with the kit from the previous war, basically. I can't remember the exact quote, but that's really how the West is geared and how it's aligned, and that suddenly you have to play catch up when you are confronted by a crisis. As you say, there's been a huge proliferation within drones and drones knocking things out. I've been part of that process when I was on the front line as part of the 131st. All our missions in the first 6 months, 7 months, maybe 8 months, were all clearing tree lines, fighting for islands on the river, sort of traditional sort of reconnaissance roles of just creeping through the undergrowth until you're scratched, you're bleeding down your arms, and you're covered in sweat and grime, and it's just you live in hell, and you're just enduring the huge amount of airstrikes and artillery strikes. But that changed because I actually went away, and I went away for a month, literally, but maybe 2 months, sorry. And when I came back, everything had changed. Suddenly the Russians had deployed a huge amount of drones, that our boats were being targeted a lot, and we hadn't caught up with them. There was a huge imbalance of drones, and the first thing I did, literally within days, was to, with the urging of one of my teammates as well, of course, was to start investing in drones. So we created for the first time for the 131st its own specialist FPV drone team, and we began. And our mission was simple: blow up their boats, target their infrastructure, and try and create the conditions for our troops to then push across the river at a later date. And we did that for about a month or so, and then we were taken off that part of the front line and redeployed to the east, where we started attacking tanks and that sort of stuff. And the guys did amazing work, destroying in the first week alone like 3 or 4 tanks just by themselves, and armored vehicles. So so again, that shows you how adaptable soldiers can be with the right resources as well. Is that we went from being fighting on the front line, clearing tree lines, and getting gunfights with the enemy, to suddenly investing in drones and blowing up their tanks, and doing it on a diet. Literally, in a matter of weeks, we were deploying as a drone team. So yeah, I think that highlights what war is going to be about. It is about mass. It is about innovation. It's about making sure that there's support behind you, not just internationally, but also from your civic population. And just to echo and channel the spirit of General Ben, the great American commentator of this war, it is a battle of wills. The modern fighters is what it's always been, a battle of wills, whereby the country that is able to harness the most resources to get channel the most amount of energy from their people is going to succeed in this war. And as internationals, as foreigners, we should really support Ukraine in everything it does to make sure that is achieved.
And this question of will is absolutely central, isn't it? Because essentially Russia is fighting on the will of a dictator, on the whim of a dictator, and they're part of I would say, a very brutal, punitive system, hierarchy, where everyone gets dumped on from the top down, and it gets more and more brutal the further down that pecking order you are. How does will translate there? Because do people have values? I mean, I've watched a lot of these videos by Zolkin, who talks to the prisoners of war. Overridingly, many of them say they came for money, came to fight for money. Surely that does not give you the will you need to win in such a brutal battlefield.
Well, so it's not just about will. Russia has an army of slaves, an army of desperate people, either, as you say, pursuing money or freedom if they're a former prisoner. There is a huge difference between the storm units of the Ukrainian military, the frontline boys and girls who are literally in the ditches, in the trenches, fighting, going head to head with the Russians. There's a big difference with how their officers treat them and how the Russian officers treat their own troops. Don't get me wrong. No doubt there are mistakes, and I'm sure there'll be international volunteers out there who have been very frustrated with decisions that have been made on the ground. And I've been there, where I've been put in situations by my commanding officers that have been, to be kind about it, a little bit difficult. And there is resentment there, but that's part of war. And that for me, that's what makes a good soldier, is actually instead of becoming sick and tired with your commanders, or sick and tired about the situation that you find yourself in, realizing that there is a much bigger picture here. That yes, maybe the mistakes have been made. Yes, you're under a huge amount of pressure, but you have to find it in yourself to keep going. And that's the strength of the Ukrainian people. They're a lot more. They will often trade ground for blood. And I've actually spoken to a lot of Ukrainian soldiers who are willing to negotiate just a little bit of land for blood. Because I can remember speaking to one guy, because this is a controversial issue here, because there's a lot of Ukrainians that will be like, no, I'm going to fight to the end and all the rest of it. Don't get me wrong. I support them just as much as I support the words of my friend here. But my friend once said to me, he was just like, we're losing so many good people. Like, Russia's not sending their best. They're sending the dregs of their society in many respects. It's a slave army, and we'll kill 10, 20 to every one of our guys that we lose. But every one of us that dies is just another loss. It's such a loss to our nation, and it grieves us, as opposed to the slave army, which will lose 100 men and they would send another 100 men after them. So that's what shows you. A lot of people turn around and talk about the will of the Russians, that they will throw these meat waves in. These meat waves are often very desperate men who realize that if they turned around, they'll be shot by their own troops. So they've been filled with propaganda, whereby it's like you often see Russian troops just killing themselves, because they are told every day, if the Ukrainians capture you, they'll do despicable things to you. They'll cut off your head. They'll murder you and torture you in the most brutal ways. So these people are forced to fight. The Ukrainians themselves are being more careful. They lose so many men. Don't get me wrong. entire units of Ukrainian troops can be lost because of how dangerous the Russians can be and how difficult the environment they're fighting in is. But so for me, the battle of wills that plays out on the battlefield is that both sides are doing well in their own different ways, and they're for their own different reasons. Do you know what I mean? So the Russians do take ground at huge cost to their people. The Ukrainians do give a little bit of ground, but kill dozens of soldiers for every man that they lose. And it's just, but they've got the will there. So it's both sides are. We're in the 9th round of a boxing match. Both sides are heavily bleeding, and they've ripped each other to pieces. And from now on, it's going to be who can keep fighting, who can stay on their feet in the ring and keep pushing back.
And of course, keeping Ukraine in the fight, it's critical that the West, and this is the bit I don't understand, rather than just giving Ukraine enough to stay in the game, right from the start, we should have given Ukraine more than it needs, so that it then has the choice of what to use and how to use it. We are still in the territory of escalation management, and well, I've only got sort of, I've got a million questions left. There's only 2 or 3 questions we've got time for. It still seems we're in that territory of escalation management where we are giving Ukraine both the kit and the permissions it needs too late in every single circumstance. And the incursions into Kharkiv show that as well. They were not allowed to hit, and still aren't technically allowed to hit, Russians massing on the Russian side of the border. In the full knowledge that that will soon be sort of thrown into Ukrainian territory. That has to change, and it has to change urgently, doesn't it?
Well, this is what irritates me as well, is the sort of the delusion of escalation. If you look at the Korean War, the Southern Korean forces were under a huge amount of pressure. The Americans get involved in the fight. They push the Koreans back. The war looks like it's going to be won by the Americans. The Chinese deployed troops attack. Chinese troops are attacking American troops. They're supplying weapons and all the rest of it. They support the North Koreans far more than the West has supported Ukraine. America wasn't launching nuclear missiles at Beijing during the Korean War. During the Iraq War, Iran was supplying the militias and the terrorists in Baghdad and other places with a huge amount of weapons and bomb-making kits and all the rest of it. America wasn't bombing Iran and attacking Iran. They realized they were condemning Iran, and they were sort of threatening Iran that they should not be targeting American troops and all the rest of it. The frustrating thing here is that we've had to eke out supplies from the West to Ukraine over the last 2 years, from tanks, everything's, and it's one issue after the next, whether it's rocket-propelled grenades or anti-tank missiles, I should say, to suddenly it being tanks themselves, to more artillery pieces, to finally aeroplanes and planes and jets and all the rest of it, and then long-range missiles. All these things are being dragged out of them. Russia is constantly drawing red lines everywhere it can possibly draw them, but Russia's always going to do that. And the thing is, you've got to wake up to the fact that Russia has an economy around the size of Spain's. It's actually a very small, barely a regional power. It's only a regional power because of the size of its armed forces and because it has nuclear weapons. And we've got the passion and the support of the entire European Union, pretty much, albeit there's a few naysayers. The United States, there is such an imbalance here. If the West collectively turned to Russia and said, actually, screw your red lines, here's our sodding red lines, and we're going to do everything we can to get Ukraine to win, you might as well just back off. Russia is not going to start launching nuclear weapons, because that would involve the complete destruction of the Russian state. I think that genuinely, that if Putin even ordered it or even started pursuing that as a realistic course of action, I think he may even be toppled. I think that would be the thing that actually gets the people around him to say, actually, this mad dog needs to get put down. So I don't support, I think it's ludicrous, the idea of non-escalation. I genuinely think it's destructive. I think it's the very thing that the Russian propaganda machine threatens. I think we're being a victim of Russian sort of, not cyber war, sort of propaganda here.
So coercive control, I think that's what it's called. Yeah.
A much more eloquent man than me. That's what we're a victim of, and we need to get past that, because the stakes here, as I said, are vast. That's why we need to win this war, and hopefully There are some countries that are better than others, and hopefully the countries with the loudest voices and with the most passion on the rest of it will win the day, and we will get this war done. But just like the old saying is, America will try, was it Winston Churchill that said America will do all the wrong things first before finally doing the right thing? That's kind of the same thing with the West generally now.
One would hope so, but Russia seem to have fairly well understood our behavior. We are being dangerously predictable, I think, on that. The last question here, and it really ties back into the first impression you created of that sense of actual sort of tragedy of seeing your friends volunteering and going to fight, people giving up their civilian lives. There's two things that come out of that. I mean, one is the average age has been pretty high, hasn't it? So what you've got essentially is, in large part, apart from the many volunteers, you've got the older generation of Ukrainians who are intentionally sacrificing themselves to try to preserve the younger generation who have the potential to transmit the culture, have families, trying to protect them from that. That's a broad pattern there, which is, I find, deeply, deeply tragic and affecting. But the next bit is that if Ukraine is to win, and the fact that we have foisted this ammunition famine on them means that they have lost an extraordinary number of people, they are going to have to dig in to those younger demographics, and they are going to finally have to get to grips with mobilization combined with more Western arms capabilities.
Oh, absolutely. I think Ukraine can do more in rallying its population. I understand, and it shows you the imbalance of values here, that Russia will throw anyone it can. It will rip open the jail cells and send the prisoners to fight. Whereas the Ukrainians themselves, they are genuinely trying to protect and nurture their youngest generation, because, as you say, that's the generation that's going to carry Ukraine into a bright future. What's the point in winning the battles and stuff, but losing the longer term war of a stable country with hope and optimism for the future? So I understand why they're trying to protect that. I do think that they should realize that the stakes here, because of the inability, because they can't rely on the West, they can't rely on us to provide them with the kit they need to win this war, that they have to say to themselves, right, well, we're going to have to gamble here. We're going to have to gamble the lives of our most precious people, and we're going to go for this. And I do think they should harness that energy, and they should apply it to the front line. I'm 37 years old. I've been fighting in different wars for, as I said, more than 10 years now. I can only talk for myself here, but I think this is probably echoed by a lot of the men and women who are on the front line, the average age of which is like 42 or something. And that is, I was sitting once with Richard from Frontline Kit. This was in the summer, just before I went back to join in the summer offensive, and I was being quite pessimistic. In fact, I genuinely thought I was going to die, because it's actually something that I've always had. I'm quite a pessimistic person on the front line for my own safety. I genuinely think like, oh, I'm buggered now. I'm quite, it's quite amusing. People take the mick out of me sometimes. But I was sitting with a cold beer saying, I think the summer offensive is going to be tough. We're going to have to push the other side of the river. I've been on those islands. I've been fighting those islands. I think I'm doomed, sort of thing. It's not going to stop me, but like I was quite pessimistic. And then he sort of changed the subject, and he turned around and he pointed out to the entire street, because it was in Lviv and it was in the summer, and there were so many young people on the streets. Everyone was having a drink, and you wouldn't have thought that there was a war on, genuinely. And I sort of looked around at all this joy and all the rest of it, and I have to say, and he asked me the question, do you sort of resent the fact that all these young people, that all these young men who are fighting age, that they're not joining the military and fighting? And I'm being genuinely honest here in saying that I love the fact, I love sitting in Lviv and seeing people having fun and seeing people on the street having a drink and all the rest of it, because it reminds me what I was fighting for. It's the one thing that I could people watch all day in Lviv. If I see a group of 18-year-old young men, I don't want to see them in uniform at all. I genuinely think that if wars can be fought and won by much older guys, then so be it. That should be the way it should be done. But at the same time, I'm realistic and all the rest of it. So and I think there's going to be a lot of men out there who have this on the front line now, who are suffering in those trenches, who feel the same way, that when they come home and they see the streets full of people and having fun, all the rest of it, there are genuinely some people online who say, oh, I'm sure the soldiers on the front line hate this. I'm telling you now, as someone who's fought on the front line, who is a soldier of the Ukrainian military, or certainly was a vet, is now a veteran of the Ukrainian military, that I actually find it a personal joy to be amongst it. So yeah, it reminds you what you're fighting for, and it gives you hope for the future, basically.
And of course, many of those people are contributing to the economy. They're contributing to innovation. They may well be involved in helping Ukraine remain resilient. It's that sort of idea of resentment perhaps doesn't reflect the complex reality of what many of those people are doing for their culture, their country.
But it also reminds you that there is there are reserves there, that there is untapped energy there, untapped resources within Ukraine that need to be deployed. But it's an untapped resource that people are holding back because they think to themselves, Christ, I don't want this to be damaged and destroyed by this conflict. So if there is going to be a mobilization, it has to come with the weapons and support from the West that they need. There's no point rallying 1 million young men and women only to see them die under-resourced on the battlefields of the East. If we can channel the spirit of the West to get them the supplies they need, then rally these young people to join the older guys who have all the experience, who have a lot of the passion, all the rest of it, who can help train them, they'll be interspersed with them in each unit, then I think we've got a battle-winning formula. But as I said, the Ukrainians are holding back their reserves because they can see the West holding back their reserves. So if both sides commit, then this war will be won. And that gives me hope for the future.
And that's an incredibly important place to end on, an incredibly important message, because Russia will not hold back. It will not stop until it stops. And I think you forcefully expressed that in this video and in all your writings. I think it's absolutely clear what we ought to do. And if anyone watching this wants to take action rather than feeling despair, do what you said there, write to your representatives, go on marches, attend meetings, take action. That, I think, is the best remedy for despair. Mesa, thank you so much for appearing on the channel. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. I know the audience will appreciate it. Thank you for everything you've done for Ukraine as well, and for your continuing support in the information sphere, fighting the informational battle.
Thank you so much. Anytime.